Section 1.5, we're going to continue our little talk with angles, but we're going to do a little bit more with angles than what we did before. We're talking about different types of angles and that kind of thing. Let's start with this first. Just draw this. Oops. What happened there? I thought I had this done. There we go. And let's draw another one about like right there. Now these are angles, okay? They're rays, made up of rays. I'm just going to leave the little arrows off on the ends of them, okay, just for time's sake. But let's take a look at these two angles. Look at angle 1. See what if I put a 1 right there, it's talking about from this top ray to this middle ray right here. That's angle 1. Put a 2 here, it's talking about this middle ray down to this bottom ray right here, okay? So that's angle 1 and angle 2. So the first thing we're going to talk about are these two angles, and these are called, see how they're kind of next to each other? They're right next door to each other, aren't they? And they also share the same vertex right there. So we call these adjacent angles. All right, write that down. You might have heard somebody actually use this word in regular conversation. Probably not, not kids, not teenagers. Don't usually say this, but as people get older, their vocabulary increases a little bit, and they'll talk about being adjacent. Adjacent basically just means being next to something, right? Okay, you've probably heard somebody say that before. And after we teach this lesson, kids usually come back and say, "Yeah, Mr. Hamrick, I can't believe how many people actually say adjacent. Never even thought about it before, but now that you mention that, people do say adjacent quite a bit." So if they, I say, my room is adjacent to Mr. Barry's room. Okay, it means we're next to each other. So these angles are next to each other. But they have to do a couple things here. They have to share the same vertex, and they have to share a common side. Do you see this common side right here, this middle one? Okay, angle 1 has this middle side, doesn't it? And angle 2 also has that middle side. So they have a common vertex, and they have a common side. All right, so for instance, let's do a couple angles that may not be adjacent to each other. Okay, look at that. What if I call this angle 3 and I call this one angle 4? Are they adjacent angles? They kind of look like they're next to each other, right? This 4 is kind of next to this 3, isn't it? But are they adjacent angles from what I said before? They must have a what? A common vertex. Do they have a common vertex? No, they don't share the same vertex. Look at the vertex with angle 3. It's right here, isn't it? Look at the vertex for angle 4. It's right here. Are they in the same spot? No, they're not, okay? They might share a common side, right? Because angle 4 has this ray as a side. Angle 3 has this ray as a side. But they don't share a common vertex. Are we okay with that? Okay, there's one other thing about adjacent angles. We won't worry about that too much. But if you know that much, that's good enough. All right. So that's one type of angles. We're gonna talk about several types of angles, angle pairs. Here's another one. And you've probably seen this before, but we're going to give it another name. Let's call this, we'll just call it 1 and 2 again. Is that all right? Look at angle 1 and angle 2. Now, what do they form? Angle 1 and angle 2 form a what?
Line.
Straight line. That's right. They form a line, don't they? Okay. And there's two angles that make up that line. Angle 1, if I added up angle 1 and I added it to angle 2, it's going to make a straight line, isn't it? All right. So we call this thing, here's a name for it, we call it a linear pair. And it kind of makes sense when you look at what these words mean. What does the word pair mean? 2. Right. So there's two angles here, aren't there? Okay. So angle 1 and angle 2, there's two different angles. And what do they form? Zeke, you said it. What do they form? They form a what?
Line.
A line. Look at this. Look in this word linear. What do you see?
Ear.
Okay. Right. You do see ear and you see near. But the geometry thing you see is what? Is line, okay? So there are two angles, a pair, two angles that make up one line. That's a linear pair. Now let's talk about how many degrees this is. We've talked about that before, right? We talked about acute angles, obtuse angles, straight angles, and all that. A linear pair are two angles that make up how many degrees? 180 degrees, that's right. So I could say that angle 1 plus angle 2 equals how many degrees? 180 degrees, all right? So that's what a linear pair does. A linear pair are two angles. It's not just two angles that make up 180 degrees. It's two angles that make up a line, a straight line. All right? It's kind of redundant to say straight line because line in and of itself means it's straight, but A lot of people say straight line. I'm okay with that. All right, so there are two angles that make up a straight line. What if we had this? What if I had, let's say that angle is, excuse me, 40 degrees. And let's say I have this angle right here is 140 degrees. All right. Well, what's true about 40 and 140 if I was to add them up? They add up to 180. Okay, so those two angles add up to 180. But are those two angles a linear pair? No, they're not, because these two angles themselves don't form just one straight line, do they? Now, if I took this and moved it over and said, well, if I added them together, it'd be 180. Yeah, but a linear pair are two angles that actually form on their own. Those two angles, they actually form one straight line between those two angles. Does it make sense? All right, so this is not considered a linear pair. We do have a name for that. We'll learn that in just a few minutes. Okay? So linear pair are two angles that form a straight line. Did you write that down somewhere? I didn't write it down, but I've said it about 3 times now. All right, so you should have it written down. Two angles that form a line, or a straight line, if you want to say that. Okay, let's do another type. Look at these two. I got two lines that intersect each other. What do we mean by intersect each other? What do the two lines do? They cross each other, and they intersect each other at a what? At a point. That's right. Two lines intersect at a point, and that would be that point right there. I'm not concerned too much about that point. What I'm concerned about is the angles that it forms. So let's label the angles that are formed here. Okay? We've got angle 1, angle 2, 3, and 4. Everybody see those? Now look at the angles that are across from each other. Like directly across from each other. Like for angle 1, which one do you think would be directly across from angle 1? Angle 3, okay? And what about angle 2? Angle 4. Okay, now we don't say that there are angles that are across from each other. We give it a fancy geometry name. They're not adjacent, okay? They're not adjacent because look, they do share the same vertex, don't they? But they don't share a common side. Look at angle 1. This angle comes out like this. Angle 3, this angle comes out like this. They don't share a common side, so they're not adjacent angles. We call these things vertical angles. Vertical angles. It's actually a little unfortunate that we call them vertical angles, because when you think of vertical, you think of up and down, don't you? And 1 and 3 look like they're kind of like horizontal to each other or something. But they call them vertical angles. It just means the angles that are across from each other. They don't have to be directly one on top, one on the bottom. All right? I heard one person actually teaching this online, and he said he wished they didn't call them vertical angles. He wished they would just call them opposite angles, because it kind of makes a little more sense, doesn't it? That 1 and 3 are opposite, 2 and 4 are opposite. But I've never really seen in any book them refer to these as opposite angles. They always refer to them as vertical angles. So we'll stick with that name right there. Okay. So vertical angles. So let's list the vertical angles. Angle 1, and what's vertical with angle 1? Angle 3. And what are your other pair? Angle 2 and angle 4. Okay, so those are your vertical angles. Now that's very, very important. Here's kind of like a little sneak preview. I don't think they actually tell you this in this lesson right here. I don't think they do, but I'm going to tell you right now. Look at angle 1 and look at angle 3. What does it kind of look like they might be? Exactly right. They look like they're equal, and they are equal. Okay. Anytime you have vertical angles, if you have two lines that intersect each other, they form four pairs of vertical angles, or four angles, two pairs of vertical angles. Okay. Those two vertical angles will always be equal to each other. It doesn't, I didn't draw these lines like a perfect certain way so that they would be equal to each other. All right. Those angles would be equal. Any two lines that intersect each other, you're going to get two pair of equal angles, equal vertical angles. Okay, so 1 and 3 would actually be equal to each other. We're actually going to learn this in another lesson. This is just kind of like looking ahead, but angle 1 and 3 would actually be equal to each other. And angle 2 and 4 would actually be equal to each other. Without even me knowing what the value of angle 1 is, I could tell you that 1 and 3 are equal. We'll kind of show this, we'll kind of prove it a little bit later when we get to this actual lesson in the book. But right now, that was just kind of free of charge there. They don't tell you that in this lesson, but it is kind of nice to know, though. All right, so 2 and 4 would be the same, 1 and 3 would be the same. Everybody good with that? All right, so that's vertical angles. So we've learned 3 types so far: adjacent angles, a linear pair, vertical angles. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to that linear pair. I said in a few minutes we would learn something about angles that add up to 180. So that's what we're going to do now. Let's make it look about like this. I don't know, let's say this is 60 degrees. Now watch this. I think you could probably figure this out. If this angle right here is 60 degrees, what do you think this angle right here is going to be equal to? How'd you get 120, Josh? That's right, you take it away from 180. Does everybody see that? Because look, these two angles add up to be 180 degrees because they make a straight line, don't they? So if they add up to be 180, then how do I figure out? Think of money. Everybody knows how to deal with money. What if you go to the store and something costs 60 cents, right? And you have $1 in your hand, right? So you give them $1. So how do you figure out how much change you get? You get 40 cents, right? You probably didn't even think about it, did you? But what math did you actually do? You went what? 100, what? Minus 60, okay? In this case, they don't add up to 100. What does it add up to? 180. So if I give somebody 180 cents and it costs 60, I'm going to get what? 120 back. So this would be 120. Does that make sense? Everybody okay with that? Watch this. Let's change the values of it. Let's say that this was 50 degrees. What would this angle be right here? It'd be 130. Again, what did you do? You took the angle and you just subtracted it from 180, didn't you? All right, let's do one more. Let's say this was 140 degrees. Okay, so this time I'm giving you the bigger one. If this is 140 degrees, what's this one going to be right here? It's going to be 40. Again, what math did you do? You took it away from 180, right? So that would be 40 degrees. Now, I'm going to really see if you're paying attention. You think you got that? What if I called this x degrees? X could represent any number, right? So I'm not sure what it is, but I know that this is x degrees. What would I call this angle right here? Think what we're doing. We've done it 3 times. When I said this was 60, what'd you do to get this?
Oh, 180.
You didn't add it. If I said this was 60, then what math did you do in your head? You went, give me the whole math. Right, you subtract it from 80. So you went 180 minus 60, didn't you? Okay, then I said this was 50 degrees, didn't I? What math did you do to figure out this angle? You went 180 minus 50. When I told you this was 140, how'd you find this one? You went 180 minus 140. But this time I told you this was x. So how do you get this angle right here? No, we didn't go, listen, what did we do? All 3 of those. We didn't go 40 minus 180. We didn't go 60 minus 180. We went 180 minus the angle that I give you, right? So this angle right here is going to be what? 180 minus what? X. And that would be that degree right there. Okay? That's what you're doing in your head. I mean, I know you just think it, but you need to know what you're thinking. So if I said this was 40, you're like, oh, that's 140. That's easy. Well, what did you do? What math did you actually do? You went 180 minus 40, right? Well, what if I said this was x? How do you find this? It's not y, because y could be any number. Okay? If this was x, this would have to be, what? 180 minus whatever this angle is, which happens to be x. Everybody see that? That's really, really important. You have no idea. Some of you guys are just blowing this off and looking all around and everything else. You have no idea how important this is right here. So pay attention. Write it down. Okay, understand what I'm doing right here. Jada, you with me? Come on, get your head up, please. So this is very, very important. Now these 2 angles right here, they add up to 180, don't they? So we call them supplementary angles. Write that down. We're going to use that word a lot. You should be taking notes. Should be taking notes. Okay, I asked you to do that right when we started, to get your notes out and start writing this down. Everybody can just copy what I'm doing. Okay, it's not that difficult. There's supplementary angles. Just write down what I'm writing down at the very least. You can just copy. So these are called supplementary angles. Supplementary angles are angles that add up to 180 degrees. Write that down. I didn't write it. I said it. But what do? They add up to equal what? 180 degrees. Okay, that's what supplementary angles are. Supplementary angles are 2 angles that add up to 180. Now remember that thing I did before with the 2 angles, but they weren't adjacent to each other? Like this. Watch this real quick. If this was 40 and this was 140, even though they don't form the same line, guess what those angles are? They're what? They're supplementary because they add up to 180. All right, let me give you a little worksheet.